Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back with you for the 177th Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. We have an incredible range of show today, and we're going to be on with the full 2 hours. And we actually have good news for a change to report. We have Vinnie DeStefano up all night, going to give us a report on a favorable decision from the British courts on Julian Assange. We've been waiting a long time for this. We also have David Swanson, the great peace activist, going to join us hopefully momentarily. Ken Bennett is joining us from Arizona. How you doing, Ken? Good to see you, Republican state senator. TATANKA BRICCA, Nancy Parko, Mike Hirsch, our co-convener with Steve Caruso. And on the second hour, we're going to talk first about a fight over a battery, a proposed battery facility in Western Massachusetts. We have some truly great activists with us, founders of the No Nukes movement, among many other things, to talk about what this local fight involves. And we are also going to be joined in the second half hour with CAMILLA REES and a tremendously important discussion of a WHO treaty involving the health of the world. So it's really great to have all these phenomenal people with us, and that we get to start off with some good news for a change. So few and far between, but this is a very big one. Let me unmute Vinnie DeStefano here. We have so many great people with us today for this session, and welcome to all of you in Radio Land on the PRN podcast. We're joined also by a tremendous peace activist. David Hartsough is with us, really one of the stellar leaders of the movement. And David, I'm going to ask you to talk about this one instance you told me of the guys jumping off the ship. Do you know what I'm talking about here? One if by land, two if by sea. It is a truly amazing story that only David Hartsough could tell us. So really glad to have all of you with us. It's tremendously exciting. Cynthia Papermaster, back from her hunger strike. Cynthia, you look wonderful. You lost a lot of weight. How long did you hunger strike for? I don't know. But let's start with
20 days.
How many?
20.
Oh my God, you fasted for 20 days. I'm gonna have to start calling you Caesar after Cesar Chavez. That'll be a good one. Thank you for your wonderful work. So let's start with the good news. The good news, I won't even begin to characterize. Vinnie DeStefano, do you want to talk to us about this?
Yes, I would love to, Harvey. Very early today, actually at about 4 o'clock our time, a decision came through. The UK High Court granted Julian Assange permission to appeal his extradition order on the grounds that the United States has failed to assure the court that Assange's right to freedom of expression would be protected if he was forced to stand trial. The two presiding judges, Justice Jeremy Johnson and Victoria Sharp, have allowed him to launch a formal appeal in his extradition because of this apparent violation of British extradition law based on the European Convention on Human Rights that requires the receiving country to allow an extradited person to have the right to free speech. Now, if you think about this, the United States is the birthplace of free speech, and the fact that he would be denied those rights in the United States is it's disgusting when you think about it. Now, Johnson and Sharp did not buy the convoluted arguments of James K. Lewis. More about him in a moment, because what he had to say about this case and about whistleblowers in general was frightening in the extreme. Arguing for the prosecution, he refused to back away from the previous prosecutor, Judge Cromber's claim that the U.S. could argue that foreign nationals are not entitled to protection under the First Amendment, at least as it concerns defense. In fact, and this is the frightening part, he went on further in an official statement that they should terrify not only all U.S. journalists, but everyone. No one, neither U.S. citizen nor foreign citizens, are entitled to rely on the First Amendment in relation to publication of illegally obtained national defense information that poses a threat to national security. He cited giving the names of innocent sources, but there's no evidence that Assange did that at all. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. The scrupulously redacted his documents. Now, what this makes this victory in a case with so few victories is that it's the first time Assange has been given a real chance to argue that the indictment under the Espionage Act of 1917 and related charges violates his right under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which provides, unlike Judge Lewis, everyone has a right to free expression, including freedom of expression to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority, regardless of the frontiers. Now, that is the exact opposite of what Julius Lewis said. And now, the good news is that this appeal can go forward. The bad news is that Julian stays in jail until such time as the trial moves forward. Now, we're very, very happy with this decision, but we're very disappointed, and our efforts will be to free Assange. That means getting him out of jail. He sits in Belmarsh prison. He's been convicted of nothing. Quite frankly, he hasn't even been tried for anything, and yet he's been in the harshest prison conditions for 5 years after 7 years at the Ecuadorian embassy. Now, that was the Tobacco Auctioneers version. It's good news. It is really good news in a world full of a lot of really bad news.
Well, that's amazing. Let's celebrate our victory here. I wish to God that they let him out of jail. What if we offered to exchange prisoners and gave them Donald Trump in exchange for Julian Assange? Would that work? What do you think?
Well, unlike Julian, Donald Trump is not going to go to jail. The Supreme Court is going to make sure of that. And he will be like Julian Assange, been accused of a lot of things. But the difference is Julian is being punished for his supposed crimes, and Donald Trump is not.
It's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. But thank God there's a little good news. And so they're not going to extradite him. He's not going to come to the United States in the near future.
Well, now here's the caveat on that, is that this allows the appeal to go forward. Now, if I were a conspiratorial person, and I am, I would think to myself that Joe Biden is just trying to kick this can as far as he can down the road past the election. They have not given a date. The prosecution defense have to come back with responses by the 24th in 4 days. But when the trial will take place, this appeal will take place, it's anybody's guess. But having said that, it is good news that he will finally get his day in court, because this is the most Kafkaesque thing about this case. He's been in a legal limbo, hadn't been charged, hasn't been tried, hasn't been convicted. So this is a case of a punishment first, trial later.
Unbelievable. Well, I hope to God he survives being in jail, and I wish he'd get out ASAP. So let's hope.
From your lips to dog's ears.
We're joined by the great David Swanson. David, it's wonderful to have you with us. We're going to turn the podium over to you in a couple minutes. I'm sure you're going to have a lot to say about Julian Assange as well. MYLA, go ahead, MYLA.
Yeah, Vincent or Vinnie, we keep hearing about how WikiLeaks exposed a lot of, but you have made me aware that not only have war crimes been at WikiLeaks, but also extraordinary infringements on the privacy of American citizens by the CIA, and also interference in foreign elections. And I think that is all a part of the Vault 7 releases, and I wonder if you can fill us in about the Vault 7 releases and their significance.
Excellent question, MYLA. And if I read this in a James Bond style spy novel, I think, oh, this is crazy. But what the Vault 7 releases showed is that the CIA developed ways to hack into our smart devices, our smart television, our smartphones, our iPads, our smart refrigerators and toasters, and turn them into listening devices without a warrant, operating 24 hours a day, unbeknownst to the people that own them. And that's why the CIA, was run by Mike Pompeo, went ballistic, because they wanted this avenue to spy on citizens without having to even go to the very, very compliant FISA court. And now he hasn't been charged for the Vault 7 releases, but if he is ever extradited, there is no doubt that they would throw that charge when he got there. And he's already facing 175 years. MYLA, there's one other thing you mentioned. Julian Assange is a equal opportunity outer. He's produced millions of documents on the United States, on Iran, on Russia, on Scientology, on all kinds of malfeasance and criminality by large organizations or corporations. And yet, WikiLeaks in its entire lifespan has never had to issue a retraction or an apology for what they publish. And this notion that he somehow endangered people, I will quote Brigadier General Bernard Carr at the opening hearing. He said, and I quote, "No one was harmed by anything WikiLeaks released, and it was truthful." So they are charging him with the crime of providing information that the public has a right to know.
Wow. So the bottom line here, Vinnie, before we go to David Swanson.
Yes.
What can we do? What do you
call your congressman, call your senators, let them know that this extradition needs to be dropped. Write to Merrick Garland, write to the President of the United States, support House Resolution 934 calling for the extradition to be dropped. This is a equal opportunity, a chance to defend the Constitution. Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Communists, Socialists, anybody that believes in freedom of speech should be behind this case 100%.
And is there a central website or
Yes, there is. There's AssangeDefense.org. If you would like to see the proceedings and the interviews, you can go to the YouTube channel of Assange Defense or Stella Assange .org. StellaAssange.com. Both of those YouTube channels have they can't broadcast the proceedings, but they had the entire circus that was outside the court. And many, many people speaking and being interviewed, including by the great Matt Ho, who's working for Assange Defense on this.
Fantastic. Okay, everybody, gear up. Let's do this. And Wendi Lederman, you want to say something? And then we're going to go to David Swanson. And by the way, I want to welcome Anna Georgie to the call. Anna's my old clamshell buddy from Western Mass. And in the second hour at 6 o'clock Eastern, we're going to jump in and talk about her local fight on a battery facility, and then we're going to go to the WHO and a treaty nobody knows about with CAMILLA REES. So that's up in the second hour. Anna, glad to have you with us. Wendi, go ahead. Okay, you're muted. Oh, I got to unmute you. There we go. There you go.
Thank you. If Steve wants to co-host me, please. Sorry, I'm late. It's computer problems. I just wanted to say really quick that and I'm really sorry that I missed that beginning statement, but I have been following. I just want to encourage everybody to really double down on your action for Assange and for Julian right now, because as I kind of projected in a private meeting with us, that sometimes courts, especially if they're trying to cover up for other naughty courts, will make very performative measures to look like justice is in effect and happening. And so really right now, Julian's life and his case, press freedom, democracy, everything. It all depends on us using our voices and not letting him become invisible, and just keeping him in our voices, in our thoughts, in our hearts, and part of the daily conversation on what the implications of his case and just what a hero that he deserves our support. So double down, because this is it's a tricky game that the courts are playing. Thank you. Thanks, Vinnie. You're awesome.
Thank you. Vinnie, you're great. And I don't want you to go to sleep just yet. I want to introduce David Swanson. Are you with us here, David? Can you, are you unmuted?
Hi, Harvey. How are you?
Good. How are you? Okay. I don't see you, David, but, there you are. Okay. There you are. You got a nice orange shirt on. Obviously in honor of our first president to go to prison. So David Swanson, I can't even begin to describe. I want to, we are over 50 people now with us, and David, as you know, this is rebroadcast on radio. It's live webcast on YouTube, so it gets around. And you are one of the great peace activists of our time. You've been nominated for a Nobel Prize. You've been won various awards for your activism, and also for being an all-around good guy. We're on with Bob Petrakis, by the way, who just had you not long ago speak in Columbus, Ohio, and with David Hartsough, one of our truly, truly great Quaker activists who I want to have tell us a story in a minute. But there was an interesting, you've just heard Vinnie talk about Julian Assange. There was also in today's news, an international court is now going to try and indict both Netanyahu of Israel and Sinwar of Hamas, and to have a joint hearing or whatever, prosecution, I would hope, of what's gone on with the war there. Now, you have basically involved with what we call world beyond war, right? You corrected me. I said without, you said beyond. Do you want to start by telling us what you're working on, what you do, and what is the difference between a world without war and a world beyond war?
One is something that everyone loves to say, even though it doesn't exist. The other is something that will facilitate finding our website and our organization, because it's our actual name. That's the difference. But as a bunch of idiots, we chose the name World Beyond War, and we can't get anyone to say it. Everyone says World Without War. We capitalize the beyond, all caps, doesn't work. But if you want to find the website and all the incredible material my colleagues and our volunteers and everybody have been producing for the past 10 years, you have to go to World Beyond War. I also work for and with lots of other groups, including rootsaction.org, which by tomorrow, if not sooner, will have a petition you can sign in support of urging governments around the world and citizens to arrest Prime Minister Netanyahu at the earliest opportunity and extradite him to The Hague to face prosecution. You can also find numerous petitions and pages for emailing your Congress critters in support of Julian Assange's liberation, and emailing the so-called Justice Department in support of dropping the charges against Julian Assange at rootsaction.org and at worldbeyondwar.org. The interesting connection between these two stories, I think, is that you could watch the State Department's spokesperson today claim that the United States, not the International Criminal Court, the United States has jurisdiction over crimes in Gaza. Why? Because it provides the weapons. How many lawyers are going to make a living figuring out what that means over the next years? But in the case of Julian Assange, the United States is claiming jurisdiction to prosecute journalism globally, right? Julian Assange cannot be guilty of treason to the United States, as most of his detractors would have, because he's not from the United States. The United States doesn't get to declare the other 96% of humanity obliged to loyalty to the U.S. government, and straying from that makes them traitors. I mean, this is not just a threat to the institution of journalism. This is a threat to the notion that people from Germany or Nigeria or Brazil have rights independent of the U.S. government, right? So the U.S. government is
what a concept.
International Criminal Court and hold itself up as the ultimate decider here.
One thing I want to acknowledge very quickly the presence of Ken Bennett. Ken is a Republican state senator in Arizona who's been working with John Brakey to protect our democracy in America. We've had him on before, and very, very interesting. I hope we get to you, Ken, to talk a little bit about that. And we also have Anna Georgi, great local activist from Western Mass, that we're going to have in the second hour, talking about a battery facility there. And this David Swanson, as a global activist, this is a big deal. The joint indictments of Netanyahu and Sinwar would be a really amazing step forward. I would hope towards changing things. What can you describe the body that has issued this challenge to indict these two guys?
I can't describe it very positively, although I guess that's my duty now. But the International Criminal Court.
We want your opinion.
I mean, as you know, the International Court of Justice, which has been around for many decades, has already taken up the case against Israel at the instigation of the government of South Africa, has concluded there's reasonable grounds to assume that genocide is underway, in fact, has spelled out the genocide that is indisputably underway and ordered that each behavior that makes it up cease, and is pursuing that case. God knows how long they'll drag it out, trying the government of Israel for genocide. But that goes after a government, and it requires another government to go after the government. The International Criminal Court goes after individuals. So if Israel is committing genocide, who's doing it? The prime minister, the minister of war. And so these individuals, and of course the United States, the next step is top US officials who are providing the weaponry, who are providing the legal defense, who are pushing the propaganda, who without whom nothing could be happening in Gaza. And so Mr. Netanyahu is now subject to arrest should the good citizens of Israel find the means to do it. Should he step outside the borders of Israel and set foot somewhere where people are good enough to do it, or where a government is good enough to do it? And of course, the US Congress, the Senate, has been talking about inviting Mr. Netanyahu to come and spew his propaganda to a joint session of this clown show. And I think that's even more likely now. I think they're going to say, oh, we have to stand up to this notion of the rule of law in support of the rules-based order, and might makes right, and we run the world. I think we're going to have an opportunity for everyone to participate in a citizen's arrest of Bibi Netanyahu in Washington, D.C. before too long.
Well, that would be great. There are a few people on earth I despise more than Netanyahu and Sinwar. And I think the two of them should stand trial together with Trump. That would be an interesting scenario as well. David, let's talk about your broader work for peace. Tell us what you do in general to get us to a world beyond war.
Well, the general theme of World Beyond War, that's a little bit different from thousands of other wonderful peace organizations across the world, is that we try to nudge people and groups and institutions toward abolition, toward the work of eliminating all wars, opposing both sides of all wars. Yes, prosecute Palestinian war criminals as well as Israeli war criminals without pretending they're equal, and without, for God's sakes, the ICC putting in stuff about rape that hasn't got any evidence behind it. But we try to push people toward opposing the buildup towards wars, the militarism, the weapons industry, and not just a particular war. So when student activists are asked, what are you trying to get your university to do? And some of them say brilliantly, complete transparency and divestment from all weapons. Why are they in the business of profiting off blood when they should be in the business of education? That's what we want. We want to take that little step from Israel's doing something wrong, and almost every weapons company in the world is doing something wrong because it works with Israel, to war is wrong. It's wrong on both sides of every war, and we need complete divestment from war profiteering by everybody. And so we do educational work and activist work toward that end. We do divestment campaigns, so we do campaigns to close bases and to protest and pass legislation and block trains and block ships and stop weapons shipments. Everything we can do to give people the understanding that war abolition is completely possible, and to move us in that direction.
Wow. That's well, as A.J. Musty once said when he was asked about what it's like to devote your life to activism, he said that the pay's no good, but the work is steady.
The work is more than steady. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's like, so David, I actually spoke, I think in your, somewhere in, was it a church in Virginia? You're in Charlottesville, right?
Yeah, you've been here, yes.
And Charlottesville, of course, in the shadow of Monticello, former home of Sally Hemings and her stud Thomas Jefferson. I want to bring in David Hartsough. David is, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the great peace activists of our time, along with you, David. And David, you once told me a story that I want to paraphrase if I can. You told me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you were in like a peace flotilla next to a warship. And a bunch of the sailors on the warship, you guys had a megaphone, and you were talking about the war in Vietnam and how these guys were being used and turned into cannon fodder. And at the end of your talk, seven of the sailors jumped off the ship. Did I make that up, or was I on some drug, or did I hear it right? Is that actually what happened?
Could be both.
That's the essence of the story, yes, and that's true.
That is mine, but what year was that?
1972, and the U.S. had started bombing Hanoi and Haiphong, which were, millions of people lived there, and we were living in Philadelphia at that time. And when we heard, families were getting killed, what's happening in Gaza now was beginning to happen in Hanoi and Haiphong. We decided we had to somehow put our bodies between those bombs and the people who are going to get killed. And at Earl, I think it was Earl Naval Weapons Station in Leonardo, New Jersey, we found was shipping arms every week, ships loaded with munitions. And when we went up to look at it, there were cartons of anti-personnel bombs and napalm and all the rest of it. And so we had some canoes and we went up.
Oh my God.
And started we said, we're going to block the ship. We're going to actually put our bodies between the bombs and the people in Vietnam that are getting killed. And for 6 days, we were out there while they're loading more munitions onto the ship. It was horrendous to see. And finally, some of them told us that on the next morning at 6 a.m., the ship was leaving for Vietnam. So we were out there very early that morning, paddling madly to try to stay right in front of the ship. And as the ship raised anchor, 7 of the sailors jumped off of the ship into the ocean and started swimming toward our People's Blockade, is what we called it. And luckily, that was in the New York Times and the Evening News. And unfortunately, the guys were all picked up out of the water and put in the brig of the ship. But they told us that when their ship, which was called the USS Nitro, went through the Panama Canal, the other Navy ships, which were there, had all heard about these 7 sailors on the Nitro and gave them the fist of solidarity. And actually, that blockade, we continued all that summer, but it also continued on the east and west coast and down in Charlotte, not Charlottesville, on the coast of Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia. There was an aircraft carrier getting ready to head off to Vietnam. And again, we were there with our small canoes and sailing boats to block it. And they actually took grappling hooks and dumped us into the water and then picked us up and put us face down with guns pointed at us onto the Coast Guard ship. But at any rate, the last hour before that ship left, 50 of the sailors on board went AWOL.
Oh my God.
And so, as I say, and word about what happened in those places, went to the Navy people around the world. And I like to think that our courage gave courage to these sailors, the Navy men, and their courage gave courage to lots of other people in the military. And if you've seen Sir, No, Sir, that's one of the reasons that war stopped, a major reason it stopped. The American soldiers were not willing to fight it anymore. So wow. Never underestimate what even a small number of people can do.
Well, David Swanson, I assume you know David Hartsough. And you guys, is this the kind of stuff that you do, David Swanson?
This is the kind of stuff David Hartsough has done for decades. And when you say David Hartsough's got a story, there is no knowing which of hundreds it's going to be. And they're all that good. And a lot of them are in a book called Waging Peace. Which those of you on video, David Hartsough is holding up his book, Waging Peace. This is, required reading. I mean, set aside the syllabus for, your pro-war U.S. history class and read that, and you'll be in good shape.
Well, and tell us, David, about your books. You've written a bunch of books, and you also have co-founded with Jeff Cohen and Norman Solomon, both of whom have been on with us, Roots Action. Can you tell us about Roots Action as well?
I think Jeff and Norman may have co-founded that a few seconds before I joined it. David Hartsough and I co-founded World Beyond War. And yeah, I've got lots and lots of books. You can go to davidswanson.org and click on books. But one I've got just coming out this month is co-authored with a great peace activist named Medea Benjamin, and it's called NATO, What You Need to Know. And this is part of pointing people toward the general understanding that if there's a problem with one war, take a look at all the other wars. And if you got a problem with those, take a look at the biggest institution of war making ever to have existed on the planet, namely NATO, which is, 2/3 of military spending and military activity. And it is a disastrous pro-war, weapons expanding, global World War III threatening institution that has absolute contempt for democracy while making war far from Europe in its name. And if you loved the wars in Serbia and Kosovo and Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya and Ukraine, you're going to love what NATO's got. I just watched the NATO Youth Summit from last week on YouTube, and they've got admirals and generals on there telling everybody, be ready for war. They call it resilience. We must have resilience. I call it idiocy.
Yes, and there's a great quote. I just finished watching the series on Ben Franklin, which was what it was. But as Ben Franklin said, there's no such thing as a good war and no such thing as a bad peace. And I think you two guys, you two Davids against the great Goliath here, epitomize that. David, do you want to say something before we go to Marilyn Bernstein and then Mike Hirsch?
Go ahead,
No, I was just going to say my most recent arrest was at Travis Air Force Base, blocking workers going in to load bombs onto planes to go to Israel to drop on Gaza. So I encourage everyone to check out, what's happening in your community, military bases, war profiteers, and get in the way and speak out as loudly as your conscience calls you to do.
Well, there you go. And we just
the
had
government needs young men to fight the war, or young people to fight the war, and the rest of us to pay our war taxes. And 50% of every person's taxes go for war. And another of David Swanson's excellent book is called War is a Lie. And that's the only way they can have wars, is to lie to people. And if you look at the history, every war is based on lies. The government has to tell us lies,
right,
to make us believe this is a good thing.
Right. And the problem with conspiracy theories is that so many of them are true. If you look at how we got into the Mexican War, the Spanish War, World War I, possibly World War II, Pearl Harbor, and certainly Vietnam at Tonkin, the Tonkin Gulf, they're all based on lies and so-called conspiracies that conspiracy theories get right.
And I think Harvey, getting back to Julian Assange, I think he'd be free if Russiagate hadn't happened. If people tell lies enough times, it just becomes common wisdom, evidence-free. And then you have the appropriate follow-through, anger at those supposedly involved. And it's absolutely disastrous. I mean, the number one thing you could do right now to prevent nuclear apocalypse is to debunk the general understanding of what has happened in Ukraine in recent years, which is a pack of lies.
It's truly amazing. We have 60 people with us. One of them is David Swanson. Marilyn Bernstein, before I go to you, I wanted to ask David Saltman, my old buddy. We also have Carl Grossman with us, one of the great heroes. And of course, in my world, stopping nuclear weapons is inseparable from stopping nuclear power plants. The two are Siamese twins here. David, what do you think of this indictment? I don't know if it's an indictment of Netanyahu and Sinwar together. David is a great expert in international law when it comes to Israel, and also a longtime journalist, Emmy-winning journalist. We also have Maya Rossman is with us. David, do you want to comment quickly on this joint action being taken against Netanyahu and Sinwar?
I don't really have too much inside information.
Okay.
That ship sailed a few years ago, but I did learn from one of my people in Italy. Maybe everybody knows this, I don't know, but I just learned it from some guy in Italy that George Clooney's wife was instrumental in setting this up. Do you know? Have you heard this?
No, I haven't.
What's her name? Amal Clooney is a very well-known international lawyer, human rights lawyer, or human wrongs lawyer. I'm not sure which. Anyway, she was apparently instrumental in convincing the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court to seek these indictments. The indictments have not been issued. The prosecutor has asked for them to be issued. A judge, and I'm not sure I'm not an expert on this court, but
Okay.
some judge or panel of judges needs to actually issue the indictment, which means that any of the principals who enter any of the countries that subscribe to the ICC convention, those principals could be arrested.
Well, as David Swanson has suggested here, that if Netanyahu actually comes to the United States, there could be a very interesting attempt to make a citizen's arrest. I don't think Sinwar will be invited to speak to the U.S. Congress, but that would be a great trial if it ever happened. Thank you for that, Dave Saltman. We got so many Davids today.
Yeah, really. Davids have to stick together. Solidarity with Davids.
Well, you all kind of resemble that statue in Florence. So anyway, David Swanson, David Hartsough, do you want to comment before we go to questions? We got Marilyn Bernstein, Mike Hirsch, Mike Reason, and TATANKA BRICCA waiting in line. No? Okay.
Go to the line.
Marilyn Bernstein, please. You're out in your garden. What do you got there? Oh, I got to unmute you. I'm sorry. Let's get you unmuted. And Mike Hirsch, if you can unmute as well. Go ahead, Marilyn.
I actually raised my hand during the Julian Assange discussion. I had done those postcards for him, and one of them came back to me on Saturday with a member of the House's name and address blacked out with black magic marker. It was very odd.
Uh-oh. All right. Well, let's keep an eye on it. Keep sending those postcards. Mike Hirsch, and then Myra Reason.
Thanks, Sluggo. Great to see you, David. Every time I see you, I remember all the things that we've done in the trenches, whether it was after Downing Street or sitting in Conyers' office or going all over speaking out for peace. And I just wanted to remind you and ask you to comment on one of the things that you said. Working for peace, it seems like it's an endless struggle. We don't really have much to applaud, but you said something like every day we don't go to war with Iran is a victory. And I want you to expand on those sentiments just to kind of give us something to smile about and keep our spirits up as we continue to work for peace.
Well, yeah, people love to be defeatist and love to be pessimistic. And, part of the problem is that they're absolutely right. The peace movement is a tiny fraction of what it ought to be. And part of the problem is that they don't know how huge it is and how many victories we have all the time and how every week we're, stopping some military base from getting built or some weapons shipment from getting sent or getting some resolution passed or getting a bunch of universities to divest. And we do know every war, but we do not know all the wars that didn't happen, all the times we came this close to, needing a war on Iran immediately or we're all going to die. And then they don't get it. And life goes on and we don't all die. And 3 or 4 years later, we need a war on Iran right now or we're all going to die. And, when you prevent the same war 6 times and it never happens, then the 7th time, for at least some fraction of the population, it becomes less credible that we really do need a war on Iran or we're all going to die, because they said that 6 times before. And so it's important for people to know that wars get prevented, that wars get ended. David Hartsough was mentioning earlier the role of the troops in the U.S. military, that I think was probably second to the role of peace activists around the world, but I don't know how you measure these things. But there is no question that people ended that war on Vietnam, and even created a wonderful disease called the Vietnam Syndrome that helped prevent wars for a number of years. And there was an Iraq syndrome that lasted for some years as well. But then the lessons get forgotten. It's just why, not just activism, but education is critically important. If people have forgotten, what they knew about the war on Iraq, to the point where you couldn't elect John Kerry and you couldn't elect Hillary Clinton, and they, finally forgot enough that they put Joe Biden in there, then, that indicates a need for us to be educating and re-educating and re-educating people better. If people don't remember what the Cold War was, if people believe the nonsense that it ever ended, if people don't know the basic facts about nuclear weapons and nuclear energy that Harvey Wasserman can, tell you,
bore you to tears with.
I mean, if you go watch an Oliver Stone movie or one of these documentary, propaganda films about the glories of nuclear energy, you just have to go talk to Harvey Wasserman for like 3 minutes, and it's all gone, and it's like,
well, when you talk about wars that didn't happen, I mean, the only reason there's still a human race is because of the peace movement. And Anna Georgi is on. We started fighting nuclear power back in 1973, and Richard Nixon said there'd be 1,000. You very beautifully stated, people love to be depressed and bound up in defeat. Anna and I know that in 1974, Nixon said there'd be 1,000 atomic reactors in the United States by the year 2000, and we coined the phrase "no nukes" at Montague Farm. And in the year 2000, there were 104. So we have a lot to be proud of from your work, David Swanson, David Hartsough, David SALTMAN, and so many others and for peace. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So there you go. MYLA Reason and TATANKA, Lynn, and Dave SALTMAN. Go ahead, MYLA.
Thanks, Harvey, and thanks to all of our Davids here, including you, Mr. Swanson. It's so good to see you. I first heard you speak on Lila Garrett's show, Connect the Dots, on KPFK. You were a regular guest, and she had that wonderful reminder that the arms industry has neither allies nor enemies, only customers. That was something that she often said, and when she had you on and when she didn't have you on. But I have a couple of questions. I also want to make note of the fact that it seems like we can be grateful that the Iranian government has shown tremendous restraint in terms of not getting involved in this war in a significant way that Israel is inflicting on Gaza. This morning, I heard Trita Parsi say that it was remarkable that they had not blamed Israel for the death of the helicopter crash and the death of the president and the foreign minister. But I'm wondering, you said earlier that there were a lot of lies involved in the what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, and I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Well, a little bit. There's centuries to go through, and I don't claim to know all of it, but your average U.S. television viewer has no notion that for decades these two empires have been pushing at each other and striving to have Ukraine belong to them rather than be an independent, neutral country. Have just about no idea that the United States helped facilitate a coup back in 2014 that put in a government with real right-wing elements that was a threat to Russian speakers in Ukraine, that instigated horrific violence, that this was the context in which Crimea left Ukraine and returned to Russia. Everybody knows that there were Russian troops on the streets of Crimea. Only the experts know that didn't make the slightest bit of difference in how the people of Crimea were going to vote. The majority were going to vote to rejoin Russia no matter what, and ought perhaps to have that right a little bit if people of Kosovo or South Sudan or other countries have the right to determine where they go. Maybe the people of Crimea should. Just about nobody knows the violence that was inflicted by Ukraine on eastern Ukraine for several years, and the conflict that was growing and growing, and the threats, and the fact that the agreement that was made with Ukraine by the Western nations, the Donbass, the second Donbass agreement, what were the agreements called? The Minsk II agreements, there was never any intention to comply by the West, that all you needed to avoid a Russian invasion was to comply with the agreements and treat Eastern Ukraine as having some degree of autonomy and independence and the ability to follow the will of its populations, and you would have been fine. But it was a scam. There was no intention. Almost nobody knows that after Russia invaded, Russia and Ukraine sat down in questionable NATO member Turkey and came to an agreement and were ready to end the war, and that the United States and the United Kingdom said, "Oh, no, you don't. Oh, no, you don't." Very few people know of the groups and individuals within the United States government, including the Rand Corporation from lovely Santa Barbara, California, that wrote reports years ago just what you would have to do to get this sort of invasion and war going, and that the West followed those steps. I mean, this is just public stuff. And so when you have year after year after year, both sides claiming imminent victory, both sides claiming moral responsibility to keep the slaughter going indefinitely to the last Ukrainian or Russian, and just blacked out, whited out any information on the attempts by Russia and Ukraine, with proposals coming in from around the world to negotiate peace and stop the killing, with the United States and NATO saying, "Oh, no, you don't. You cannot stop the killing, and we will give you unlimited weapons to make sure you don't stop the killing." And that's called aid. That's called humanitarian aid, your good civic global responsibility to aid Ukraine by keeping the slaughter going with more weapons. And the only alternative, supposedly, is to lie down and die. Is Putin wins. That's your alternative. But you negotiate an agreement. The people of Ukraine could have used nonviolence themselves, and many did, and with incredible accomplishments without any organization or support. But to fuel this violence that is killing Ukrainians, and they're now dragging people off the street and emptying out the prisons to fill the military in Ukraine. This, to call this aid and goodness and decency, and this is a good year, a good war, while the war on Gaza is a bad war. This is just the heart of U.S. propaganda, and at some point we're going to have to overcome it if we're going to survive.
Wow, very powerful. MYLA, can I move on to TATANKA? Is there anything else you want to jump in with David Swanson? Okay, TATANKA BRICCA, you're with us. TATANKA, yes. David, in the time since we last spoke, has become the chair of the KPFK board in Los Angeles. Thank God. And we will be doing next week. We're not going to meet, by the way. It's Memorial Day. I don't want to impose on people's holiday. But in June, we will have a session on Pacifica, David, which I hope you'll join in with us, or at least be aware of We are making great progress at the Pacifica Radio Network. We may actually soon have a great workable, functioning national peace network on radio. It's a great possibility. MYLA is a big part of it. TATANKA has now become a major player as the chair of the KPFK board. TATANKA BRICCA, what would you like to say to David Swanson?
A couple of comments and then a question for both Davids. First, I want to thank you both for your lifelong commitment to peace and nonviolence, inspiring to us all. On Ukraine, some of the people here on this show know, in 1976, 1 week after I concluded a leadership position for David Harris's run for the U.S. Congress, I was recruited by a couple at Stanford Research. They wanted me to recruit me to be the head of the Ukraine division. I learned in 1976, they said in 15 years, there will be no Soviet Union. And when I pretended to want the position, which was paid well into the six figures, I wanted to find out as much as I could. And what I found out was, I said, well, I know you have a 50-year plan. And they looked at each other. They said, you're really interested in the job? And I said, yes, I'll seriously consider it. They told me that shortly after 2000, the U.S. would be at war with whoever the president of Russia is. And I said, why is that? And they said, to go after our real enemy. And I said, who's that? And they said, China. So that was like, these people have 50-year plans. And everything that David Swanson was talking about, the violence that went on there in the Crimea also implicated the CIA and their choice of who they wanted to be in leadership in Ukraine. So I want to ask two things. The first thing is, I don't know if everybody knows that in June, I think between the 10th and the 16th is a week of education and action to honor the memory of Dan Ellsberg. And I would love you each to say something about that.
Okay, Dan Ellsberg Week. David Swanson, just for
David
Swanson and David Hartsough. Just for a footnote, I had the honor of being arrested with Dan Ellsberg at the Pentagon in 1980, and then we all went out to dinner. So that was really a great memory of Dan Ellsberg, who's been on this. Dan has been on this podcast as well. Whatever we are, GREEP. David, and then David.
If you haven't been arrested with Dan Ellsberg, you're doing something wrong, because he's been arrested so many times. How could you miss it? But yeah, Dan Ellsberg Week is a project of Diffuse Nuclear War, which is a coalition that Roots Action and many others are part of. And you can go to diffusenuclearwar.org and click on Dan Ellsberg Week and check out the growing list of events around the world, and find one near you, or start one near you and get others to join in. One of them that I'm fond of, thinking having mentioned the Rand Corporation and Santa Monica, many of us want to get the alley behind Santa Monica, behind the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica, named for Daniel Ellsberg, and think it would be very appropriate. It's a different building now, but it's the place where he took what ought to have been public. Same thing Julian Assange did, took stuff that damn well ought to have been public and made it public, did a public service. And I think it's, very fitting that he be honored with days and events and ceremonies around the country, but there should be physical places honoring him as well, including especially that place where he also took nuclear planning secrets that ought to have been public, ought not to have existed, but ought to have been made public if they did. And many years later made what I think is still the most important book anyone can read about the nuclear threat, which is The Doomsday Machine.
David Hartsough, how many times were you arrested with Dan Ellsberg?
10 or 15, I'm not sure how many. But it was always an honor, and it was fun.
Really?
It was fun spending time in the jail cells together.
Really?
But I think Daniel Ellsberg is one of the most important American citizens that have ever lived. And his courage and his perseverance to keep speaking truth to power and making the truth known. And then the last, whatever it is, since the publication of the Pentagon Papers, he has been arrested over and over and over again and trying to warn the American people about the danger of nuclear weapons. And that's another great big lie. Nuclear weapons are supposed to be for security, for protection. And the truth is, as Dan said, nuclear weapons are a threat to all of us. And regardless of who starts the next war, and it could be anybody, if this escalates into a war between U.S. and Russia or U.S. and China, probably at least 5 billion people are going to die, which is probably the greatest disaster that has ever happened or could ever happen to our Earth. And so this week in June is a time to honor Dan's life and to continue the struggle that he made, challenging the war machine, the nuclear weapons that are stealing our resources from doing anything positive for our own people. And anyway, it's the exact opposite of security. So the idea, but at any rate, so the actions that diffuse nuclear war are suggesting are renaming a street in your city to Daniel Ellsberg Street, to getting your city council or a county council to pass a resolution in support of Daniel Ellsberg Week, to do an action at a military war profiteer base, and they're all over the country in every congressional district or at a nuclear weapons facility. So it's a great opportunity, and I think that the nuclear danger, any of the wars that we're presently involved in, or the one with China that we're going full tilt ahead in preparing for that war, would be insanity. And some people say the war with China will start in 1975 or 2025.
Well,
that's people in the Pentagon that are saying that. So the time to speak out and stop that nuclear madness is not tomorrow or next year or after the war has started. It's right now. And this would be the greatest honor to Dan Ellsberg.
Wow, beautifully stated. We're at 6 o'clock Eastern time. Anna, Georgie, and her folks from Western Mass are geared up to talk to us about their incredibly important fight to save the environment there. I do have 3 hands, and I do want to very quickly, Anna, if you can give us 5 minutes, we will let Lynn, Paul, and Steve very quickly speak, and then David and Vinnie can give us a goodbye, and then we'll go to Western Mass, and then we're going to be joined by CAMILLA REES at the bottom at 6:30 to talk about the WHO.
Please catch the rest of the show at grassrootsep.org, and please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Green Grassroots Election Protection Coalition. Thanks.